All right, off we go. So as usual, I provided a link in this document, although this link does not seem to be working. I don't really know what's going on here. I'm curious if this link is actually working for you guys when you open up the page, but if not, we can open our GitHub project and I'll send you guys the link directly over Zoom. All right. Feel free to go ahead and clone if you haven't already cloned. If not, feel free to pull. The last time we worked on this project is about 3 weeks ago, but the code that we wrote before we all went on holidays is up and ready for you. So make sure you're pulling the Blaze version of the master branch if you want to follow along. Otherwise, feel free to just watch and follow along. That works too. All right. All good. We're on our master branch. No new changes, and we're up to date with our origin master. So everything's good. All right. So 3 weeks ago, we were using context to create a toast widget on our site and using timeouts to clear the toast. And then we also used a ref in order to help make sure that we're canceling the timeout and restarting it if we display a new toast halfway through one is working towards expiring. So the current state of our application, if we start it up, we open our localhost, is I have my 3 products. I can add them to my cart. It shows me a little toast widget down here that pops up for about 5 seconds. And we have our, sorry, moving the Zoom thing out of my way. And we have our cart down here with a bunch of items in them. We can clear it out. We refresh, our cart is still the same. If we try and do something invalid, it's going to give us this red toast down here. Sweet. All right. So this is pretty cool, but all of this data we've still hard-coded, which is very bad. Our site is not going to be very powerful if we're just hard-coding all of our data. So way back in, I think it might have honestly been like the first week. I don't know that I can show you guys. Let me see if I have GitLens. Okay, I have it disabled. Let's turn it back on. All right, so GitLens is a tool that lets me see like where all the changes were made to a project. I was hoping that it would not take up so much space, but that does seem to just be the case. Dang. All right, that stinks. We'll make it really big. Anyway, we haven't touched this in a very long time. All of this was from basically 2 months, 3 months ago. And this is all hard-coded data according to our schema for what we define as a product. So our product has a name, ID, description, price, discount, a group, number available, seller, image, creation date. Several of these fields we haven't done anything with and don't have them hard-coded in here. But it would be really cool if we could pull this data from somewhere where that data could potentially change in the future. Somewhere where we're going to store all of our products. People can create new products and everyone can view those products. We got to have some other application running that actually stores all of this information somewhere centrally. And everyone who operates on that data, whether they're purchasing something to decrease the stock that we have, or they're adding a new item, or they're removing an item that they were previously selling, in any of those cases, we all need to be operating on data in one central location. So hard coding it doesn't make any sense, not going to get us very far. So what we're going to do today is we're going to pretend that we or someone on our team went ahead and wrote that other application, our backend server, which is the host of all of our product information and defines the API through which we can actually interact with those products. And what I am planning to use today is something I found called dummy JSON. I have a separate link here for a GitHub repo that just has a really big markdown file of lots of different APIs that you can use. But when I say API, what I mean is a server that has defined HTTP endpoints, which are basically just like targets that we can send a web request to say, I want to do the thing that this endpoint allows me to do. So we are telling our server, which has defined very specific ways that we can interact with the server, and that's it. We are under the contract of whoever designed the server and the API, what we're allowed to do with it. And we're going to send web requests saying, I want to get a list of products. And maybe we send some data with it. Maybe we configure our request in a certain way such that the backend is willing to accept it. The backend server will go behind the scenes. It'll open up a database where all the products are or whatever other stuff it needs to do. It's going to grab all the products that we specify we want. Maybe we're filtering and we only want things that are related to a certain category, or we want to limit the number of items that we're getting. It'll do all of that for us. That's part of the contract that it provides. And then it's just going to ship all of that data back to us on our front end. So the way that we can turn our website from something sort of basic into something that's really, really cool and has really powerful features is by interacting with some sort of backend server. Any questions about that high-level explanation of what we mean when we say backend or API or web server? Any terminology that I threw out that was unclear? Okay. If that terminology comes up again and it's not clear then, feel free to speak up at any point. So what we're going to do is we're going to use this server that someone has created and has a static database with a bunch of items that they have populated in there and will never change and does not allow us to change it. But it's providing us endpoints. It's providing us a contract through which we can simulate that we're interacting with a real web server that does cool things. And it's free. This one in particular is free and doesn't require any credentials, which is really awesome. So we can just plug and play it. There's probably a deeper discussion to be had about integrating with a server where you have to provide some sort of authentication or you're exchanging data. But this is very simple and a good starting point, which is why I've chosen this one for today. And basically, what we've got here is we have some documentation for how we can actually request things from this server. So any API you go to, they're going to provide you with some sort of documentation that says, what are you actually allowed to do on the server? If they didn't, you'd just be making blind guesses as to what the server lets you do, and you would never, ever be productive, and you would never find actually valid endpoints. So this documentation is telling us all of the things that we are allowed to do with products. We are allowed to get all of the products from the server. How do we do that? Well, we send a request to this particular endpoint /products. Our web server is defined by a scheme, which is HTTPS, and a host or like a host name, which is dummyjson.com. And then it is a route, which is all of the data that comes after the host. In this case, our route is /products. Down here, if we wanted to get a single product, then we would use our same base URL, but the route is going to be different because this route does something else. It's a different endpoint that has a different contract. So this one is /products, but then another identifier over here. One thing that you'll see is even more than a common pattern, it's just how you do things, is if I want to get all of a particular item, then I might define a route that is the name of the type of item that our server houses, which is products, and a get request, which is a type of request that gets something from the server, And this is your format for that particular route. If I want to get a single thing, then I use the name of that type of object and then the unique identifier, which in this case is an ID of number 1. You'll see this a lot. Other things we could do, we could search for products. So if we want to maybe like, I think in this case, what it's doing is it's filtering. It's looking for products that have phone in the name. So I don't understand how this is an example output here, but in some way it's querying things and it's giving us back this result here. We have other stuff here. It's just giving us some other ways that we can interact with the server. We're not going to do most of this really complicated stuff. But if we wanted to make a more complete application, we could start sending other types of requests. So what we were talking about previously is a GET request, which says, get me data from the server and bring it back to me. In this case, a post is saying, I have data that has been created locally on my website, and I want you, the server, to create this in the database. So a post means that I am posting data to the server to be created and become official. And in this case, our request is going to have a body, which is the actual data itself that's being created. We can always specify headers on our web request, which just is sort of metadata about the request that tells the server how to process it. In this case, this header in particular is one that's very well defined, content type. And it says, what is the actual type of data that is coming to the server? What the server reads this content type and decides, okay, how do I need to process the body of this request based on what type it is? In this case, we're sending JSON, but we could send plain text, which is just like a text file. There's no particular special format to it. We could send form data, which is like form encoded data into a string. And in that case, the server would need to parse those things differently. But this is one way of just telling the server, I am sending you JSON, treat it like JSON. And there's other things too. There's put and patch, which are for modifying existing resources. There's delete, which is deleting a resource by its identifier. These are very common patterns that you'll see in a lot of places. I can send some more resources. I didn't come up with any good articles to send about REST APIs. A REST API is sort of like a specification for how you can design an API to adhere to a lot of very well-known and well-defined principles, which makes your API really robust and really good. And from a user perspective, makes it really easy to understand and integrate with your API. I'll see if I can come up with some stuff after we jump off today, but I don't want to waste any more time. Anyway, long story short, we're just going to do this. That's it. That was a lot of talking about just copying some data, but we're going to modify it a little bit. We're going to do some more complicated stuff. Okay. So with this, let us go ahead and find where our data currently lives. Like where is it pulling this dummy products? And then let's see what we can do with that. So if I open my app.jsx, you'll notice that we're importing our dummy products, which is the data that we hard-coded, and we're passing it into our table. That's yucky. We don't want to do that. If I open the page that has the table of all of my data, that table should be fetching the data itself and then displaying it. We don't want to hard code that data. So we're going to start by just getting rid of it. We are no longer going to import our dummy data into our app.jsx. Our app is just a layout. It does not need to know about the products. And instead, we're going to fetch it from inside the table here. So if I delete my data, we eventually need to replace this data with our actual resource that we have fetched. So I'm going to go back into our dummy API here. if the zoom bar is going to let me. And we're going to copy this data straight out, and we're just going to stick it right in here. So what is this doing? Oops, not this one. Sorry. We want this top one, get all products. All right, so what is this doing? This is sending a web request, which is indicated by this fetch. If we try and parse out the really complicated signature of this function, we have an input, which is a URL or a string for a URL. And then we have an initializer, which really is just an object with a bunch of data about the request. So down here, when we get down to our posts that we saw, we have our URL, which is the first argument, and our second argument is an object with all these different properties of our request. In this case, we don't need any properties. And we're going to start with the promise syntax for fetching. So you'll notice that fetch returns a promise of a response. I don't know how much it got covered in previous weeks. I know I did not get to talk about fetching or asynchronous JavaScript, but I do know that it was part of the content a little bit, so I don't want to spend a crazy amount of time on this. But just as a refresher, if we have a promise, that indicates that data is coming back to us, but it's not here yet. It's something that's happening in the background, and we will get this response or whatever data is coming back from our promise in the future. And so we need to write code to specify what's going to happen when that occurs, and then let the rest of our code execute down here. So one way of doing this is using then and catch blocks. So our then chains onto our fetch to say, when we get our promise back, that data, that response, then we're going to convert it into JSON, because it's actually just going to be like a bunch of random disgusting bits and bytes that have not been decoded into the JSON that we expect it to be. And then once we've done that, we are separately going to console.log our data. Just for clarity, I'm going to turn this into a proper function, although what was in there was perfectly valid. And we can specify catch and then blocks at the end. So catch says if one of these things fails and throws an error, then what we're going to do is we're going to catch that error and just print it out to indicate that there was an error. We also have finally blocks, which always execute regardless of everything else. So it doesn't matter what combination of then and catch blocks we hit, finally will always execute at the very end to do something. So we have this data. Just so that we can see how this works, we're going to swap back in our dummy products, but we're not going to keep this very long. What I would like to do is I would like to open this application and check our console to see what is this data that's coming back to us from the server. So let's do that. If you haven't already booted it up, npm run dev. I already have mine running, I think. And if I open my console, which is going to be very small, so let me bump it up. We have our data that came back from the server that we console.logged. We do not have any red errors here, so we didn't hit our catch block. And then we hit our finally block, which was the end of execution. So what is this data? This data is an object that specifies the total number of products that came back from our server, the limit, so how many products is it actually returning to us in this particular moment? It's only giving us 30. And then it has an array of all of those products themselves. So there's lots of stuff in here. I'm going to copy out all of this data about our product and paste it in here to our dummy products. And the paste is going to be really ugly. basically not really work. Title, description. Availability status, brand, category. We already have our description. Dimensions, discount, ID, images, meta, price, rating, return policy, reviews, shipping information, stock, tags, thumbnail. I already have title at the top.
You could do right-click format.
The formatting in here is just kind of screwed up. It's secretly worse, like with all this stuff in here. What's going on? Anyway, all I'm trying to do is just pull this together so that we can see what the schema that our server is sending us versus what we have defined as what we're going to handle. So there's a lot of stuff in here that we told ourselves we're not going to handle. So let's just ignore all of the properties for this product that we don't care about. We do not care about a weight. We do not care about a warranty information. Our thumbnail is pretty useful. That sounds like an image to me, although there is also an images section up here. These appear to be somewhat similar. I'm going to keep the thumbnail and get rid of the images because this is just a single thing and I don't know how many images it will give us back. All I really care about is the thumbnail. Do not care about tags. Stock. We could do something with this in the future, but we don't currently do anything with it. SKU, we don't care. Shipping information, reviews, return policy, rating. We do care about price. I do not care about meta. It did have creation date, but we don't actually use creation date on our application anywhere. So we're going to ignore that. And same for number available. We don't do anything with that right now. ID, name, description, price, discount, group. I don't think we do anything with group. So let's get rid of that and our category. Don't care about dimensions. Don't care about brand. Don't care about availability. All right, so what do you have left? We have ID, title, description, price, discount, image. ID, name, description, price, discount, image. So we're missing the seller, which I think we'll just generate randomly just for the sake of it, to say that we did it. But you'll notice that the data here is not exactly in the same format as we're getting back from the server. We have all the properties we need. They're called different things. We're maybe missing some stuff that we can generate locally. Or maybe there's a property locally that we derive from several different properties from the server. So it's very common to pull data from the server and then convert it into the format that you want to use in your application. Do this all the time at work. So that's what we're going to do here. I'm going to take this product information since we no longer care about our dummy products. And we're just going to delete this file in a second anyway. And let's pull this into our table just so we can compare one more time. All right. So what are we going to do? We fetch this data and then we turn it into an object. And then instead of console.logging, let's do some more interesting stuff here. So I would like to create a state variable that holds our product data. Set product data. And we'll start this as just an empty array for now. Nothing special about it. And when we fetch this data, we want to set our product data to be this data more or less. We got to do some stuff to it though. So our data is this whole object. I don't give a shit about limit or any of the other stuff that came with it. Skip and total. I don't care about that right now. So our product is going to be data.products, which will access this array of 30 items. And then we're going to set our product data to be products.map. So we're going to take each product and turn it into a different thing. So we're going to turn it from this format into this format instead. So how are we going to do that? I'm going to get rid of this product with quantity, stick it up top for now where it's less visible. All right, so what do we got to do first? We got to take our ID. Our ID is the same in both. So ID is equal to product.id. It's title from the server, but name is what we want to use locally. So we're going to say name is equal to product. Title. Description is the same in both. Description is equal to product.description. We have our price, which is the same for both. So price is equal to product.price. And we call it discount. They call it discount percentage. So we're going to say our discount is equal to product.discount percentage. What else we got? We got a seller, which they do not have. So we're going to have to figure that out. For now, maybe let's just hard code this to be your name or my name or whatever. And then we have our image, which we call image and they call thumbnail. So image is equal to product.thumbnail. All right. So this looks pretty good to me. So we have our products, we pull it out of the data that we get back from the server, and then we're going to set our state variable to be a map from that data from the server into our local type. And if anything goes wrong, we're going to log that error, which actually we have a toast. So why don't we just go ahead and toast it just for fun? We'll take this out. Actually, no, we won't. I'm going to take this and stick it somewhere we don't have to look at it. So we have our product data. We have our toast, which if you'll remember in our other places, oops, product row doesn't have anything in it. Let's get rid of that. We have our cart, and in order to use our toast, no, we want cart display. So we call use context with our toast context that we created. And then it gives us access to all of these different functions to create a new toast. So one of our toast methods is error. Is it not auto importing? We'll manually import if we have to. It really does not like this, does it? All right, fine. We'll import our own toast context, I guess. That is it because I'm running it, you think? All right. Well, it's where are we? We are in product, we're in table, and then we go up one level into components. And then we go into miscellaneous. We go into toast. And I don't think we need the .jsx there. Export default toast provider or named toast context. All right, I think that will work. And what's going to happen? Well, we error if something goes wrong. What is our actual error function? Well, it's this where we provide some text for it to show to get products. We'll include the error as part of the message. And we can get rid of this finally. It's not doing anything useful. All right, so we have our fetch, we have our catch, we have our toast, and this dummy products that we hard-coded temporarily, we're going to instead filter our product data. There's one thing I'm missing here that's really important. If I do this right now, we're going to get might be right. We could try it, see what happens. But what's going to happen right now is I'm going to fetch my data. I'm going to map it. I'm going to set my state. It's going to cause my component to re-render. And when it re-renders, it's going to fetch the data. It's going to turn it into a bunch of objects. It's going to set the state and force it to re-render and so on and so forth infinitely. And that's really bad. We don't want that. So this needs to go in a use effect, which you may remember is a hook that executes when something changes. But we can also specify a use effect with an empty dependency array. And if I do that, then it's going to execute once when my code first causes this component to be rendered to the screen and never again. So I only need my products when it starts loading the table. I don't need them again after that. I have all my products. Maybe in the future, we write some code such that that changes and we actually need to get the product, like re-download the products or something like that. But right now we don't have any need for that. So we're just going to throw it in a use effect and say, just get all of my stuff when this component first renders. Okay, let's see what happens if we run this. Cautiously optimistic. Oh, sweet. First try. That's crazy. All right, so what's actually happening? We are getting all of our data from the server, which you can actually see if you go into the network tab in your API here. But this is really bad. I think we're getting rate limited if I remember correctly. I've seen this before. All right, we're going to ignore this for now since some of our images do actually show up. But our network tab is a place where you can see all of the web requests that are going out and you're getting a response. A lot of these are like to download JavaScript or like web content or images or assets from the server such that they can be displayed. And that also is like really controlled by Vite and React. It's when I run my Vite dev script, it's creating a web server that serves me my single page React application and in turn all of the assets and stuff to make it work. So a lot of the stuff in here you can pretty much ignore. This is getting like the main HTML document and it's downloading my JavaScript, which I don't know if I can actually see what it's giving me back. It doesn't look like it's going to show me, which is annoying. But the thing that we're kind of interested in here, if we scroll down, is this dummyjson.com request. And this is the request we actually made to our web server. So we sent a GET request. We didn't specify what type of request it's going to be. So by default, it's a GET request in our fetch up here. And we are fetching. It gave us back a status of OK, which indicates it worked. Everything was just fine. If we scroll down, we can see all the headers that were attached to our request. We did not put any on there explicitly. We saw earlier that someone like specifically put on the content type header to indicate to the server that I'm sending JSON, but we didn't need to do that here. The server knows that we're sending JSON. So these are all the headers that got automatically thrown on there for us by the fetch API. And this is all the headers on the response. So every web request, you send a request to a server, and when it is finished, it sends back a response object, which says, did it work? What was the status? What's the data that came back with it? And that gets decoded. So I can see my request. There is no payload on this request because it's a GET request. You don't send data with a GET request. You just specify what do you want to get. And we can see our response in here, which Firefox is going to just nicely format for me. If you're using Chrome, you'll see the same thing, but there'll be a preview and a response tab. And the response tab is really disgusting, unparsed stuff. And the preview is this nice, pretty format. But for us, it's all in one. So what did we get from this request? When we got all of our data, we got our products, total skip limit, and all the different products in here. So we got 30 at a time. If I scroll down and count these, it'll be 30. The bottom one is Kiwi. The top one is Essence Mascara Lash Princess. Very fancy mascara. Sweet. So that works. And we had very minimal problems. We got about 20 minutes, so we're going to do like one or two other small little things, but we might finish a little bit early today. That's the main thing I wanted to talk about. Does anyone maybe like have any questions about what we just did, or like APIs or web requests or HTTP stuff? Anything that was confusing when we talked about it that maybe we could go over again before I keep rolling?
Could you please back on browser and just would like to clarify on the console? Yeah. It was like skip for the requests. I don't remember where was it. Where is the object? Where you can see
Yeah, it's in the response. Skip down here.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Why in some cases skip equals 0, but in other cases 5, for example?
Truly, I have no idea what this skip represents. It's something that the creator of this dummy JSON API has decided is going to come back in the response. When I looked through the documentation for this, I did not really find anything to indicate what skip is. Maybe if we control F, we can find it somewhere. Skip limiting. Skip 5. Yeah, there's not really anything in here that's super helpful. I don't know. I don't know what it is. It's something that the API has defined that means something. All the data that comes back from a response is part of the contract. It's not random. It's not something that's just like a general HTTP thing. This is what the designer of the API has decided is going to come back. And most of it makes sense. I would need better documentation from whoever developed this server on what
Okay.
is in order to actually like review this code, but it's not ours. So we're just going to ignore it for now.
Thank you. And one more question. Does
Mhm.
fetch just a second. Does the fetch return promise by default?
Yes, a fetch is always going to return a promise. The way you handle that promise can be different if you want. You can use this like then and catch for syntax, or if you feel more comfortable with using async and await, we could create a function, an async function, full products. And then we do this other syntax where we say response is equal to await fetch from this URL, which I'll copy in for the sake of time. And this fetch still returns a promise. It's not going to show me because it's stupid and it hates me today. I don't know how I somehow borked my extensions, but this still returns a promise. This is just a different way of handling it, where we say, instead of like registering functions that are going to execute when that promise resolves in the future, when that data comes back, we're just going to wait for the data to come back. And at this point, we have our actual data here and we don't have to like do this res.json thing.
And then functionality the same, which starts from 24th and 12 string, the same
Yeah.
functionality. Okay.
Like
Thank
these, it's exactly the same. We're doing the same thing. We're just doing it in a different syntax. Which one you choose is partially personal preference and also partially like what makes the cleanest amount of code. I find that a lot of times when you do these then and catches, unless it's really simple, then you might end up doing like fetch, then when I get my data back, now I need to fetch again, and then I do dot then and dot catch. And if I save these, they will often indent to their own line. And then we're just like making this really complicated deep tree, and trying to follow the logic here is really complicated. So I think async await is generally a lot more like easy to understand and to follow just as a reader. But that is not to say you should always use one or the other. It's up to you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Those were good questions. All right. Maybe we just mention, oh, we got one more question. Go ahead, Sharice.
Can you go over the different types of requests? Because there's get and post. And so I guess get is getting the information and post is posting the information that you get, or
Yeah. So like the way that I differentiate the endpoint or like the specific part of the server that I'm sending a request to. And that endpoint is designed to do a very specific thing that will be communicated to you in the documentation, is by a combination of the route to which I send it and the type of request that I send it to. So I will go ahead and paste this to you guys in just a second, but the request method is like a way of semantically communicating what is the action that I am doing on data to the server. So a get means I am getting data from the server and the server is sending it back to me. A post says I have data locally that has just been created. Maybe someone filled out a form or signed up for my application. And I'm posting that data to the server, and the server needs to create it in its database somewhere. A put is another one that's pretty common. It says if data is not already on the server, go ahead and create it. But like the main reason why we would want to do a put is I want to replace the entire object in the database with a new object. So it already exists, it has some properties, but I just want to replace the whole thing. A delete means I have a specific object on the server that is identified by an ID or a number or something, and I want to remove that from the database. And so the server is going to do that. And then we also have this patch down here, which says I want to modify just like a specific field or a set of fields on the object. The ones that I just mentioned in passing are the ones that you will be defining if you're a backend developer, or the ones you'll be using if you're a front-end developer. These other methods sort of communicate other things, but you like very rarely, if ever, will you use these by hand. You will see a
Is
lot of these options requests if you just open the network tab. And there's like other different things, but like the ones we're using are the ones that we just mentioned. Sorry, you had a question. Go ahead.
is get the default? Because I noticed when you went to inspect, it was already when you go to your website, uh
Yep.
if you look in the inspect, it says get
Yep.
at the top.
Get
So
is the default. If I
okay,
wanted to
since
specify a different one, then I'd put it in the options up here. I'd say method is equal to post. And I can do that here. I could say method is equal to get just to be explicit, but I don't need to. Any other questions while we're here? Send you guys a link. Generally, I think the Mozilla web docs are a really good resource for a lot of just like general web concepts, not even like JavaScript, although they do have a lot of good help on JavaScript. But anytime that I have questions about web stuff or HTTP or the REST APIs, I think it's a good place to go. All right, let's mention a couple other things really quick. These will take about 3 seconds each. But one thing that I generally would not want to do when I'm developing my website is hard code this base URL here. So this particular request is going to dummyjson.com, and it's always going to go to this particular route. If it went to any other route or had a different method, like that wouldn't make any sense. It's not valid. But this URL, very often you'll want to change out that URL um, programmatically or like just for the sake of testing. So I don't always want to send requests to the production instance of my application running somewhere in the cloud. Oftentimes I want to send it to a local copy that I'm running just on my computer on localhost. Or maybe I have like a development instance of my application. That's one that I do pretty often at work. We have this really complicated like database that just stores all the information that our company needs. And we have a production instance, and then we have a backup instance, like a dev instance. And every week we take all the data from our production instance and we copy it into our dev instance. And you can do whatever the hell you want to the dev instance. You can mess it up to your heart's content. And so very often I will run applications on the dev instance first to test them out. And then once I'm really confident, then I'll run it on the production instance. So maybe I want to swap this out for dummy JSON dev or for local host 8181, if that's where I'm running my backend server locally. But I don't want to do that manually in here because I'd have to update it every single place that I'm sending a web request, which right now is just one place, but very quickly could be, hundreds or thousands of different locations where I'm sending that data. So typically what we do for something like this that we want to swap in at runtime. So I want it to load up when I start my application on my computer. And then as long as it's running, it's going to send all requests to that specific place. I'm going to use an environment variable. So the way we use an environment variable is we import meta dot env dot, and then the name of our environment variable. At least I think this is the syntax, although it's telling me that it's invalid. So I think I probably got it wrong a little bit. But let's call this eat base API URL. And we're going to create a .env file, which is going to have that variable vite base API URL. Vite requires that any variables that you pass in have to be prefixed with this vite. And we're just going to pass in that URL. We just double check what the syntax is here to make sure I'm not messing you guys up. I'll go ahead and send you guys this as well, just in case you're curious. All right, so we import .meta.env. Okay, so there's no space here. It's import.meta.env and then the name of our environment variable. Maybe we don't need the v anymore. Oh no, I think we do. Yeah. So we still need to prefix it with v, otherwise it's going to be undefined. So that's what we got. We got v base API URL /products. And then somewhere else, if we were making a request to our dummy json.com /product/1, well, I could take this out. And once again, we just use our environment variable. Just like that. And now all I have to do, if I want to swap out this URL, is I go into my .env where it's defined, and I just throw in something else. My localhost 8080. I could do my dummy JSON dev instance, anything I want. We just throw it in, and everywhere in our application that loads in that variable, that's where it's going to be. You have lots of environment variables on your computer. Those of you on Windows, you probably have to like open your settings and search for environment variables but for Mac people, if you just type in env, there's lots and lots of stuff in here. I should probably not show this because there's probably some secret stuff in there somewhere. Yeah, so that's our environment variable that we're loading in. It's going to be loaded up by Vite when I actually run my application. So I'm going to shut it down and restart it and just make sure that it's still working as expected. Looks like it might not be, given that I am not getting anything back. So what's the problem here? Oh, I just left it as dev, which doesn't exist. Let's take that dev out. There we go. Now we got all of our stuff back. Yes, don't do that. .env should go at the top level up here, not in your source folder, where you will also have lots of problems in debugging for an hour. That's the worst feeling. All right, so we got that. We got our environment variable in here. The other thing that I want to do really quick is I want to take this filter and make this a little more efficient. So again, it doesn't really matter in this case because we have our use effect and we're fetching all of our products one time. And we don't really have a lot of products, but let's say I had like 1,000 products. If every time I want my component to re-render, I had to refilter my products, that would be really, really, really annoying. It would be expensive. We might get like a half a second of lag every time my component re-renders and my page changes, and that's really gross. So if we have this sort of expensive operation that we don't need to rerun every time our component re-renders, we only need to rerun it under certain conditions, we might want to look at memoizing. So use memo is a hook that is provided by React, and it allows us to specify a callback and a dependency array again. But what it does is it computes a value for us, in this case, our filtered data, and it's only going to compute that value. I'm surprised this is already, it's not imported. I don't know why it's doing that. But it's only going to run this function, and this function needs to return the value that was computed if something in our dependency array has changes. So we don't want to leave this one empty like the use effect. We do actually want to recompute this data. When do we need to recompute this data? Well, when any of the state that this depends on changes. So what does this depend on? It depends on our product data. After I fetch my data and I have a new set of products, I need to recompute this. And it also depends on this filter state up here, which is when I use my search bar and I type in something and I try and filter my data. So how are we going to do that? Well, we specify in our dependency array the two things that when they change, we want to recompute this thing. Otherwise, every time my component re-renders and this function is called to produce the actual like output, it's going to get to this use memo and say, have these two things changed since the last time my component re-rendered? No, in that case, just use the value that was returned by use memo the last time. And when it comes across a re-render where something has changed, it's going to call this function, it's going to recompute the value, and then give it back to us. And the next go round, we'll get that same data. So now we can just copy in this filter into our use memo. So when those things change, we want to filter our product data and return only the items that match our filter. So what is this filter function return? Well, it returns the new array after we filtered things, and we want to return that so that our memo has back a value at the end. And again, it's not helping me out with the syntax at all. I don't know why it's doing that, but you'll notice, let's actually console.log in here, executing memo, and we will see in our console the times where it is executing this memoization function and recomputing our filter. It should only happen when our filter or our products change. So executing memo. If I add new products here, it's not going to re-execute because nothing has changed. If I filter my products, it's going to re-execute. It's doing this 2 times because of this React strict mode thing, which I think is in our index.jsx. This does everything twice to try and find bugs in state or other things like that. So we're going to leave it for now. So ignore this 2. But if we try and figure out what these are for, this is when my component first renders to the screen. This is when we have our initial state for our filter, which is empty, and so it does nothing. And then these ones down here are when we actually fetch our products, and then it executes the memoization, and then we have our new products. And so it executes one more time. So it looks weird that we're doing it 4 times up here, but as I'm actually like interacting with my page and doing all kinds of other stuff, we're only seeing it re-execute when I change my filter. And if I were to include some code that allows us to recompute all of our products, then we would get it there too, but we don't have that. All right, that's all I want to cover. We're at 8 o'clock. I thought we might finish early, but we did not. Apologize for running over a little bit. I hope that the barrage of resources that I've thrown at you have been maybe helpful. Would be good to maybe give these a read through at some point. But certainly don't have to do it right now. You can go back to the agenda. I think it's posted in the announcement anytime. I will stick around for questions if there are any. Otherwise, make sure you do the sign-in form on your way out. And I will see you guys next week.
Thank you.
Hearing no questions, I'm gonna take off for today. Feel free to reach out if there's anything. You can reach out on Slack. All right, good night, guys.